The more we help someone we love, the more our nervous system pays the price. And most of us don't even realize what's happening. The anxiety we carry, the sleep we lose, the way we hold our breath every time the phone rings, the anger we secretly feel when they've messed up again. We call it love, we call it loyalty, but in reality, when we are trying to control the healing process for someone else, something very different is happening inside of our own biology. It is destroying our nervous system, creating our own biology of trauma. The conversation in this episode is going to change the way that you think about the cost to you when you are the one who's trying to help someone else. My guest is relational trauma repair therapist Karen Moser, who has spent years working in addiction treatment centers and with their families. The mothers, the spouses, the children who tried to help their loved one. And what she discovered about their nervous system dysregulation may just surprise you, because in many ways, you may find yourself relating to how you've been trying to help others and the cost it's been to you. Let's dive in. Thank you, Karen, first of all, for your time.
Of course.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I think that you bring a very unique perspective that is not often heard. And so really looking forward to your insights, because you really started your clinical and training practice, as I understand it, in the addiction space and working inside of inpatient, even dual diagnosis rehab centers, and then started working with families. And now you're even an adjunct faculty member at Bryn Mawr College School of Social Work and Social Research. And so you're bringing in several modalities, really helping people get to the body. And as I was looking at your experience, I became very curious about what was it that initially drew you to use RTR, relational trauma repair, in your work with addictions. For those who might not be familiar fully with relational trauma repair, do you mind explaining in your words what it is?
Sure. So relational trauma repair is a model that is informed by psychodrama. And psychodrama is a whole another thing. We can talk about that later, because relational trauma repair is very specific in that Tion designed it so that anyone who, you don't have to have experiential therapy experience before, learning and implementing this model. And the way the model is designed, what I originally found really helpful about it was I could enter a group and have a topic, and all the group members would be doing the same thing at the same time. There are no experts, and it allows for a bottom-up experience. In other words, they're really going to visit their whole body, emotions, all of it, but in a very titrated way, so that it allows people to experience themselves up to the level of their ability to tolerate whatever emotion comes up.
Isn't that the truth? It can be hard to be present to some of these emotions. And the longer that they've been there and been hidden, ignored, avoided, stuffed, numbed, then the harder it can be to be present to them. And it's true. Like, we can become overwhelmed with them quite easily. And what I saw in my addiction medicine patients was that they were so accustomed to numbing everything,
right,
that they had such a low tolerance, and that need to titrate was so key, because otherwise it would just drive them to their usual coping mechanism, which was to numb everything uncomfortable.
Yes. And, those of us who have been in the addictions field for a long time, we knew before the studies came out with the PET scans that showed that there is a physiological response to when you're in a craving cycle. And what that told me was I really need to have people understand what they're medicating with substances and what parts of themselves got lost, from earlier life, and then also how to pick up from where they are now and say, okay, so here are the things that have happened. What things do I need to face before I leave a controlled environment? And or what skills do I need before I leave a controlled environment to manage and to regulate those emotions? And in addictions treatment, we just weren't doing that very well. We were teaching people relapse prevention skills, from a cognitive point of view. It was all cognitive behavioral treatment. In the 70s, they were doing some of the experiential work in the early days of psychodrama, but that hadn't really come into the more recent iterations of substance use treatment. So when I was exposed to this model, I really thought, wow, I can take this on the road and go anywhere. And so I started implementing it in my private practice. I started implementing it in other institutions, and it's just been a wonderful tool to use.
Hmm. So then how much of this in your work did you start to do with the families of those who are struggling with an addiction?
So I, for some reason, had a ton of mothers and spouses in my practice. Early in my practice, I worked primarily with substance users, but then, as I matured in my private practice, I started getting a lot of families and spouses and loved ones of people who have an issue. And I started what I called a moms group. It was actually moms and spouses, but it was all women. Um, and I had already had this group running, and then when I learned this model, I used it for 2 years in the group. And at the 2 year mark, the women were like, "We really feel like we're done. We got it." And they graduated, and some of them went on to do peer recovery work. And there's been some great things that have happened, with the power that they found in using this model. So
Just amazing. And so as you started working with families, moms, spouses, what differences did you see in their ability to be present to their emotions? And what similarities did you see with those with an addiction and their nervous systems?
well, so here's my take, is that one of my colleagues has this wonderful saying, and I'll quote her: "The family cannot remember what the substance user forgets. I mean, cannot forget what the substance user can't remember." Right? So the family members and the loved ones, their nervous systems are activated the entire time they're in relationship with a substance user, while the substance user and or a person who has other addictions gets to numb out, and they're not present. So the family members are present for all of it. So I actually think that their nervous systems are a little more dysregulated in some ways. But, and the substance user, once you take the substance away, then their nervous systems are activated. So you have, people who have been activated for a long time in relationship with someone who's just starting to be activated by all of the things that they carried before they numbed out. So you have like a recipe for disaster, right? Because what I really like to do is to combine the two. Once someone is stable in their recovery, do a family and group with substance users so that they can learn to co-regulate together and learn that they're very similar. They just have different parts of the story. They're holding different parts of the story. And with this model and also other relational models, you get to repair some of the things that got lost in the relationship.
I love that idea. They're just holding different aspects of the same story. Each one has a different experience of that story. And so often I've heard the expression of the families that I've worked with is, as that family member comes out of their freeze, as from their numbing, it's almost like they're the little child again, and their nervous system reverts back to when they before maybe they started numbing and escaping to that degree. And so having them sober is not necessarily been better. And so for the family, they expected everything to get better as soon as their loved one got sober. And
Right.
it's and then that's a whole new set of emotions that they get to experience and process through, realizing that no, like the substance wasn't the problem. It's the nervous system, their nervous system, that was so dysregulated. And we're still working with that nervous system. Nothing has changed. In fact, if anything, now it's without its medication. So now it's
Right.
even more raw, more reactive, more sensitive. And the family members are often, from my experience, Karen, feeling a lot of grief.
Mm-hmm.
How did you see grief showing up? Did they seem to recognize that a lot of what they were experiencing was grief, or maybe did they just feel their anger at their family member and not realize that there was grief behind that anger?
So my experience with this particular group was there was more anxiety than anything. There was some grief that happened later, but in the beginning, it was working with the anxiety and kind of unhooking from the, I have to help fix this person. I have to like not care about how many meetings my loved one is actually going to. What's their recovery program like? Do I have to manage it? Can I manage it? And the answer is no, because you were powerless to begin with, and you're still powerless once somebody gets treatment. And, we always talk about tough love. And my experience with tough love is it's a great tool to get someone into treatment. And then after that, you're walking in an uncharted territory where, both sides need support. So family members need support to deal with the wreckage that's been caused. And that's where I think a lot of the grief is dealing with the wreckage and all the parts of themselves that they sacrificed to help and to support and to try to get someone out of trouble when they had no power about it at all to begin with. And so finding that out and then they have to look at themselves and say, well, how did I get here? How did I get hooked into this to try to fix my loved one, or try to, because with a lot of the family members, they had histories that included their own patterns of substance use from the past with parents or, grandparents. And so this is a generational issue often that people find themselves in, and they're doing relational patterns that don't support a substance user getting better, because the more you help a substance user, the more you enable them to stay actively using their drug and alcohol. And then afterwards, the substance user is a little bit younger in terms of their mental health and emotional health. But, there's also people who, have been actively using for years and who are quite skilled in their life. And the only thing that they're doing that's getting in their way is using alcohol or drugs. And so you take that away and they have all these other adult role responsibilities that they do quite well, but then you have a hole in the soul that you have to help repair. And that's very similar to what the family members are going through.
So, I mean, you describe it so well, of just this recognizing what's always been there, that they've been powerless, but they're finally recognizing that, and then having to look at themselves and seeing how much of themselves they've given, how much of their own health they may have compromised in order to try to be saving and fixing and helping their loved one. And when I think of relational trauma repair, then I'm seeing that it's not just that relationship with their loved one, it's also the relationship with themselves that needs
Yes.
a lot of repair. So where do you even start with that, Karen?
Well, that's where the group comes in because, one of the things that in the relational trauma repair models we use floor checks. And the floor checks are these so I might put symptoms on the floor of things that people might have experienced. They're words. So maybe and it could be grief, it could be anxiety, it could be, powerlessness. And so what people would do is I would ask them, check in with yourself and move towards the symptom that best describes something that you're experiencing right now in the moment. Because moment to moment, things change, right? As people are at different phases of recovery, their own recovery for a family member and the substance user's recovery. So, somebody could have a substance user that's 2 years in recovery and still be hanging on to some of these old patterns, but they're just a little more hidden. They're not talking to the substance user about them, but they're very much in the nervous system. So what happens is that everyone in the group, once you find a commonality, you have them connect around that. And that's how they start to look at themselves. And then you build on that. So, and then there's other exercises in this model where people will, look at their own history of relational trauma. And we actually identify maybe some of the ages and things that patterns that came into, that got worse during the substance use, right? So we may find something that was in a childhood adaptation that as an adult was a survival skill that they practiced with their loved ones and families. And then you have to go back and heal the part of them where that adaptation started and why it started in the first place. And once they all do that work together, then it's not that it's not going to come up again because we know the nature of things, right? I would love to say that all of the work that I've done on myself as a person in long-term recovery, that I'm free of any of the patterns that I practiced in my life, but and I'm free of many of them, but we have to face our demons. And so, but once you understand them, it's a lot easier to face them. And once you do some of the emotional work around reclaiming the parts of yourself that got lost along the way through childhood, young adulthood, then it's that much easier to overcome them, in the present.
And I can totally see that what you're describing with doing this in a group can be so helpful because I imagine that it's a way for them to see, oh, like other people do this. I'm not the only one, and being able to create some way of being able to work through the shame of that as opposed to getting stuck in the shame of that. Are
Right.
you able to give me some idea of what floor checks you might use for starting out a group with this type of exploration?
My favorite floor check is the feelings floor check because that's the most basic. And I would do that with any group that I run. And I would just throw a bunch of feelings on the floor, and you have people go to a feeling that best describes a go-to feeling for you. So, you start there and again, you're going periphery to core, right? So you're asking questions that allow you to work with any of the material that you're working with. So the questions are key. So we start with a feeling that you're experiencing that's kind of common for you. And then I might ask another question with the same feelings. And again, this is just a range of feelings. And what's wonderful about this in a substance use setting is if you have someone who's numbing out feelings all the time, they get to call them and name them, right? So it's like, oh, wait, let me ask my body, which one best describes where I am at this moment? Which one best describes my go-to feeling that I experience a lot? And then my next question is usually, which one do you run from? Like nobody's business, right? And so what people do is they cluster around these feelings. They talk amongst themselves. If it's a large group, we have them in pods around the feeling. If it's a smaller group, we have the group share openly with each other. And then I might ask which feeling existed in your family of origin that you had to deal with in somebody else or in yourself that was problematic for you. And then at that moment, the group is right into their core feelings. And then we might do some experiential work. At that, we might do a piece of empty chair work. I might have them write a letter to someone that they've been thinking about in the exploration of feelings. I might have them write a letter to their younger self about what it was like to experience those feelings in their family. So it really depends on the group or where we take it. But what's happening in the group is that they're exploring within themselves, but they're also exploring together. So there's a co-regulation quality to it that reduces shame and isolation and increases connection, which is, as we know, the way out of using substances.
Wow, I'm so curious because with all of the groups that you've done, I'm sure that you've learned a lot. You've seen insights, maybe even patterns of different emotions that people tend to run away from, for example. What have been some of those lessons that you've learned doing these floor checks?
Hmm. Well, anger is a hot one, right? So, we actually have a floor check on anger that is all of the forms of anger, right? So, because some people have experienced anger as silence or stonewalling, right? Being shut out. Maybe it hasn't been volatile, but it's been isolating. Or, we have substance users who are afraid of their anger because if they get angry, they might go use. Um, or a family member who might not want to express their anger towards their loved one for the same reason. So anger is one of those tricky ones. Shame is another one that people land on quite a bit. And then surprisingly, sometimes people pick joy as one that's difficult to tolerate, right? That's what we all want. But when people walk over to it, they're like, huh, I really want that, or I really want hope, but I've learned that if I hope for something, it might not happen. So it's so rich. There's so many things that people find out about themselves, and it's just right in the moment. And having, in terms of training to do this work, I've done all these exercises myself because when we train people to do this, when we train other counselors to learn this model, they're our guinea pigs, right? So you have to do your own work because you want to know what it feels like to be in one of these groups. And what I've realized is that on any given day, I can find something else out about myself. And I see light bulbs go off all the time in the participants in my groups.
Isn't that always the fun process of it is we always get to learn more about ourselves.
Yeah.
There's, people that will ask me like, well, how will I know when I'm healed? How will I know when I'm done? And I'm like, friend, you are on a spiral staircase. There is no top. You will just continue to go deeper with the insights that you learn about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or go to the top of the mountain and be able to experience freedom.
yes,
A little bit of
yes.
both.
Both that depth and freedom.
Yeah.
I start everyone with 21 days of different somatic exercises. And one of them, Karen, is this idea around joy and how we actually have to titrate joy, because one of the things that they discover as they go into their nervous system and actually start to feel their body is how unsafe it has felt to feel happy, to open themselves up to joy, because that's still opening themselves up. And that has felt dangerous.
One of the characteristics of working with people with traumas, they typically will say, if I have joy, it's going to be taken away from me.
And I'm curious, is that usually followed up with, I don't deserve good things? Or
it could be, I've learned I can't trust anybody. And that's how I learned that I don't deserve good things, right? Because if people weren't acting like trusted people towards me, then maybe I might not be good enough for love, care, and affection.
And then that's when we really look at some core emotions underneath that. Does that come with shame? Does that come with grief?
Yeah.
And these aspects that the body is holding, and they haven't known how much of that their body is holding.
Yeah. And I like the idea of grieving the parents or the support that you didn't have as a pathway to allowing new support to come in that may be more, something that's a little more stable and trustworthy. Because people are fallible, right? Those of us that grow up in families where there's trauma, or maybe if we've been abused by someone outside of the family, sometimes it's you blame yourself for the thing, because children only have one way to look at it. Because if you're a child in a family, if you don't show me love, then there must be something wrong with me. So that's the only way that children make sense of things, until they understand, as an adult, you start to understand, well, my parents or that person was sick or didn't have the skills or the tools to show up in the way that you needed. Or there was a perpetrator who was a perpetrator and you had no responsibility in the matter. But you can't convince a child of that. Not until they have adult reasoning behind them.
Which right there is the challenge, right? Because we develop these parts of us that stay frozen in that time period, and they still hold on to these core beliefs. And so we can be in adult bodies, but still have these very much survival parts that maintain their strong beliefs.
And those survival parts are adaptations. They're adaptations that people cling to for survival so that they can get through a difficult situation. And they work quite well. I have clients who were the star of their families and were responsible for parents, for emotional state of a parent, for instance, and maybe protection of siblings, that it's very hard to convince the adult part that that's not going to work anymore. So the child part feels strong and turns into a strong adult. But then that strong adult eventually burns out, because in psychodrama, we talk a lot about roles. So people get role fatigue from those adaptations and survival skills that they learn as children. And so one of the things that we do with this relational trauma repair is we look at the roles that people played. And we look at them as a role rather than or part of themselves, right? Rather than their definition.
which I've seen is so healing in and of itself, Karen. I love your perspective and experience on that, because just to be able to separate myself from that and be able to
Mhm.
say that was just a role that I played. That was not my true self. That was not all of me. That was just a
Right.
role I played to survive that time of my life.
Yeah. And I can take the strength from that role, because a lot of times the strength from those roles make us good employees, right? You know, we might work too much, but they make us good employees, um, make us good partners, you know, because we might be caring towards our partners and neglectful of ourselves, right? So then the challenge is learning how to take care of ourselves as well as we take care of other people, so that we can be the best version of the person who we can be without the fatigue and the
Right.
resentment. Yeah.
Yeah, I started describing kind of what I wanted for myself when I really started this kind of work. Was I want to be in my best health, because I recognize so much of how my physical health was attached to all of this.
Yeah.
I want to be in my best health and my best self. That's what I'm going for, both of those
Yeah.
aspects. And I think that they are synonymous. Our best
Hmm.
self with these balance of parts, the
Hmm.
adaptive parts balanced with other parts or roles that I've been able to develop so that I can care for others and care for myself. It's both. And then that's also when I am in my best health. And I'm sure you've seen that.
Well, yeah, if you look at, and I'm sure you use the ACEs scores, right? You know, when you look at the what we have found related to health and wellness is that oftentimes people who have some of the chronic health conditions that are out there, we look at their emotional background and the things that may have happened to them along the way, and there are some direct correlations with physical health and emotional health. We really don't value that enough, but it's true, and vice
Which is
versa.
exactly vice versa. We are one being. And this idea that we can separate the emotions from our physical health, I
Mhm.
think was mistake on our part in the field, as we tried to kind of compartmentalize research in order to be able to
Yeah.
understand better. But that is exactly why Tiana and I are working on this project, to be able to bring the relational trauma repair to medicine and chronic health conditions, because it's still just as much at play in those areas, even though people are going to their doctor thinking that they have a physical health problem and not realizing that there are these other components and factors to every disease process, every disease process.
Yes. So true. I'm so glad that you're doing that work and with her. That's great. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's exciting what we can use the relational trauma repair model for. And as I
Mhm.
think of the work that you have done, I really see that what you're describing is that both the person who chooses a substance and the person who chooses to live and love someone who uses a substance, both of their nervous systems really have adaptations that go all the way back to their childhood. And so,
Yeah. And I would think about it as the person who walks into a substance, because oftentimes people aren't choosing. They just happen to use, and then they're that person that all the systems light up and say, woohoo, I love this. You know, we don't know who that's going to happen to. And we also don't know, you know, sometimes people, like I've worked with people who go through transitions like divorces and things like that, that find themselves in a pattern of using substances that maybe had not happened before. And, you know, some self medication that runs awry. Um, and then they have to go back and deal with, like you said, that the emotional being to heal that, because you always have to go back to the beginning and reclaim what got lost along the way. You know, we want to believe that we could, as a business, do therapy like as a business plan, you know, like we're going to just check this off and then check that off and then we're good to go. I wish it was like that.
That is so true. But, you know, we have to get to the root, to the core, to where it really started, if we're going to create the lasting change and it not just be something that we're having to cognitively manage and think, how am I supposed to respond right now? What am I supposed to do right now? Where's my checklist of things to do? If we really want a new way of being to become our default, it has to be at that nervous system level.
Mhm. And sometimes it's not as complicated as we think it is. Like the last time I heard Bessel van der Kolk speak, he said, you know, we focus so much on helping people deal with memories and past traumas. He said, I think we need to teach them how to dance, right? Because if we're dancing, we're not thinking about all of that. We're just in the moment, having fun, like being spontaneous. And in psychodrama, that's one of the things that the founder of psychodrama, Jacob Moreno, believed that if we find our creativity and spontaneity, much like children who are innocent, if we live in our creativity and spontaneity, we can be out of all of these patterns that really chain us to the pain.
And that is the work right there, isn't it, Karen? Is learning how to be in the present moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm. And as we started this conversation, knowing that sometimes we titrate that ability to be present in the moment and feeling things and being open to spontaneity and joy and play, because that can be where it starts, is that I'm not feeling safe. I can't feel that much joy without it being a trigger for everything will be taken and I'll lose everything again.
Right. Right. And all the things that we think we have to do as adults. I mean, yes, there are things that we have to do, but can we put aside the things that we have to do and think about what is it that I want right now? Not just what do I want from somebody else or what do I want to achieve in my life, like all Americans are focused on, but what is it that my spirit wants?
So as we wrap up, from the lessons that you've learned working with both sides,
Mm-hmm.
the user and the families that love them, what would be something that someone could take away if they were here to help themselves and they started to recognize, yeah, like some of my fear and avoidance of certain emotions probably does go back all the way to my childhood. And whether or not they see or, you know, had substance use as part of their family, what might be some insights and tips that would help them with their process of discovery and change?
What just came to my mind is the one of the exercises that we do in the relational trauma repair model is the resilience timeline. But I liked Tian's earlier iteration of it that we did in our groups, which is called the breakthrough timeline. So if you thought about your life to date and you looked back on all of the things that you've experienced that where you've made a good decision that turned out to turn the chain of events in a positive way, look at the strength that you found in those moments. Look at all of the people that helped you. There has to be someone in your life that you can sit with yourself and just send out some gratitude towards that person. Either you're able to talk to them and reconnect and say, I'm really grateful for the way that you showed up for me in the following way. Find the things that you love and hold on to them. Go to a park and watch kids play. Um, you know, that's kind of the things that I think of when I think of when you're facing difficult things. Bring the part of yourself that is alive and strong into whatever situation you're facing. Because there's a part of yourself that knows what it needs.
I do love those words, Karen, alive and strong.
Mm-hmm.
Bring that which feels alive and strong into the present moment. Well, thank you, Karen. I want to say thank you, not just for your time, but just for the work that you've done and brought to the world.
Thanks. I really appreciate you asking me to be here.
I love what Karen said at the end. Bring the part of yourself that is alive and strong into whatever you're facing. And I want to share a few key resources for you to do just that. I've created a new YouTube channel called Songs of the Inner World. It's a space for you to actually have words for your own inner world. The music, the songs, the lyrics, it's real, it's raw, it's honest. And that's what your body is actually asking for. It is done pretending. Now, to understand why your body holds on to these patterns from early life and how to heal, you can get all of that in my book, The Biology of Trauma. It will walk you through the science. Chapter 9 will be the patterns and why the body holds on. Chapter 12 walks you through the 3 phases of the healing journey. You can head to the website, biologyoftrauma.com/book, where you can download the nervous system journal that I mentioned in my book as a place to track your nervous system and how much of the day you are spending in survival state. My guess is that it will surprise you. I'll link everything in the show notes, of course. I'm your host, Dr. Aimie. Until next time, lots of love.